How would you categorize what is happening with modern mental health?
Oh gosh, we're making it worse with too much treatment, too much diagnosis, and way too much psych meds, and convincing people who are otherwise well that they are unwell, that they have a mental health problem.
Right, yeah, apocalyptic start there. So take me through, how much of this is an adult problem? How much of this is a kid problem? Are there some cohorts that this is worse and better in?
Sure. So, if I have a prejudice here, it's that adults mostly can handle their own lives, and we can trust them too. So, if some adults have been made to feel worse by things like therapy they don't need, or psych meds they don't need, or whatnot, I generally think an adult can say, "This is helping me," or "It isn't," and push back and make a change. But a child can't. So, the bigger problem, what I wrote my book about, is about why putting a child through a culture of therapy, through a school system that constantly treats them to various forms of what I call bad therapy, therapy that makes your symptoms worse or introduces new symptoms, why this is all so harmful, this constant feelings focus, this constant convincing children that are young adults that they've experienced childhood trauma.
Talk me through a typical timeline of mental health for young people. Like, do 3-year-olds have mental health problems? Like, what's the onset and kind of
Well,
what's the arc of this?
sure. So as of 2016, the CDC, which is the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, came out with a report. This is 2016. 1 in 6 American children between the ages of 2 and 8 already had a mental health or behavioral diagnosis. Okay,
Just dig into that for a second for me. What does that mean? What would that look like?
um, so what mental health diagnoses do they
Yeah.
usually have?
What does that mean? Yeah, mental health
That means
diagnosis.
that means a shocking number of little boys have been diagnosed with ADHD or oppositional defiance disorder. If they can't sit in their seat or they're yelling back at a teacher, they have oppositional defiance disorder. A shocking number of girls now have an ADHD diagnosis. They're diagnosing all kinds of kids as on the spectrum or having anxiety or having to. Now, do some of these kids are there's no question a lot of these kids are sad, and a lot of them are lonely, and a lot of them are anxious, but we are psychopathologizing a whole generation and convincing them that they are unwell, so they are behaving like they are unwell.
Right, okay. So it seems like, at least so far, there's two problems that you've got. One being this over medicalization or pathologization of human emotions, some of which get into things like trauma, depression, anxiety, but others are just feeling sad or down or lonely or fearful. Like, that's not necessarily something that the DSM would find, but it's this concept creep. And then the other side of this is the treatments that are coming through and the way that people are dealing with that. Is that a fair
Yes,
characterization?
exactly. We are introducing new symptoms and making existing symptoms worse. So
Okay.
normal sadness becomes depression. Normal worry becomes anxiety. No young people even use the word worry anymore. It's all, or nervous. It's all, I have anxiety. And they think of anxiety as something they have and therefore have to be treated out of or monitored by a therapist or treated by a therapist or medication, I should say.
Okay, so you mentioned there was those numbers from the CDC in 2016.
Right?
Have you got any idea what percentage of kids are going to therapy, are being seen by therapists? Who are therapists seeing mostly at the moment? Is it adults? Is it children?
So it's a great question. So we know that 40% of the rising generation has been through a therapist, but I think it's much higher because what I refer to as bad therapy, this kind of iatrogenic therapy that makes your systems worse, right? Iatrogenesis is when a healer makes a problem worse. They're getting it in the schools. They're being treated to social emotional learning and wellness tips and all kinds of emotional regulation tips that are supposed to help, but I think it's making it worse. And I can explain why, but they're also getting it from parents who are treating them based on the best-selling books of neuropsychologists and various therapists. So kids are just absolutely awash in therapy today.
Right. Where's that 40% number from?
That's a good question. I have to look it up. It was widely reported, A couple years ago, and I have to, I'd have to look at my notes.
Okay, that's the rising generation. So is that Gen
Gen Z,
Alpha, Gen Z?
Gen
Right.
Z.
Okay.
So we're talking, people born between the ages of 1995 and 2012.
Okay.
So
And
you,
the
yeah,
numbers that you found was 40% of those, so nearly 1 in 2, have seen some form of therapist.
yeah, at some point. So yes, exactly.